Hello, and welcome to another episode of In the Dirt from the Gravel Ride podcast. I'm your host, Craig Dalton. I'll be joined momentarily by my co host, Randall Jacobs. In the Dirt is sponsored by generous contributions from listeners like you. Simply go to buymeacoffee.com/thegravelride to support all our efforts. That includes this podcast and also the Ridership Forum. If you're interested in joining our community, simply visit www.theridership.com. If this is your first time listening to the show, welcome. In the Dirt is a discussion between Randall and myself about various parts of the gravel cycling experience. Separately, you'll find in this feed interviews with athletes, product designers, and event organizers, all done in the hopes of informing you, the listener, as to the various elements of the sport, the equipment, the routes, the regions that we love so much. If that sounds like your cup of tea, I'd love you to take a pause and subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app now. And with that, let's dive right into the show. Randall, welcome to the show.
Always a pleasure.
Good to see
How
you,
are you
my
doing,
friend.
Greg?
I'm doing good. Good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. What's going on your end?
Just busy upgrading all my technology. I've got a new computer, a new phone, so hopefully that's going to lead to some exciting new opportunities for content creation for me.
Excellent. Yeah, I can resonate with that. Less with the technology and more with the opportunities for content creation.
So you're just coming off your first solo interview episode for the Gravel Ride podcast. How did that feel?
It felt great to finally have done it. It's a concept that I've been sitting on for quite some time, and it's the sort of conversation that as you know from our conversations out on the bike and otherwise, it's the style of conversation that I have in my day-to-day life. And so it was really enjoyable to be able to take that style of kind of probing, more personal and more even philosophical type conversation and bring it to a format like this. So really hope that the audience enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was fun. We had actually, so it was great to hear more about his story because I just kind of knew him as a fast guy who built that team and raced in the San Francisco Grand Prix. And to get the backstory and to understand where he went professionally and his motivations and how he's helping athletes discover the best parts of themselves, I think it was really interesting to hear.
Well, and what I love too is in the context of that conversation, having his own kind of personal journey and experiences coming out. And just because somebody is a former professional athlete and a former team owner and a sports psychologist doesn't mean that they don't have their own personal struggles. And in fact, it is those struggles that that presumably make them useful to others because there's that deep empathy and understanding. So it was really nice to have a conversation that is that kind of vulnerable and open about those types of topics.
Yeah, for sure. There's some universality of what he was talking about that definitely resonated with me as a 50-year-old recreational athlete. So that was cool to see.
Yeah, I'm curious, what were some of the things that really struck a chord with you in your experience?
Well, I think, going back to what you just said about how the things he sort of struggled with as a professional cyclist are the same things you struggle with as an amateur cyclist in terms of what hole is it fulfilling in your life cycling and what's motivating you to get out there. Of particular interest to me in that conversation was the relationship bringing Chris Horner onto his pro cycling team had to the equation and how Chris's approach as a leader really changed that team and brought everybody up because he was so supportive about the collective purpose versus individual purpose. It just was really cool for me. I guess it made me think about lifting up others on a group ride or just others in our community and how being a certain type of leader can be way more inspirational than someone who's a command and control type leader.
Well, and the idea of what is the ultimate goal, and maybe there's a goal of wanting to win a particular event, having a good season and what have you. But if the experience of having done it isn't great and generative and feels in integrity and feels part of the sort of life that is enjoyable on its own, not simply because of that that achievement, then I have to question like what is the point, or at least question why these more interpersonal types of goals and needs are not being prioritized along with the goal of the race win.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and you and I have talked about this on bike rides. It's just when that mentality arrives as a cyclist, like there's certain drivers as you get into the sport as a young man or a young woman that certainly change and develop over time. And
Mm.
I'm curious if accelerating the discovery of those other motivations really leads to exceptional athleticism versus discovering them later in life.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I can definitely say that I was, to the extent that I achieved anything, there was definitely some ego drive, but the things that I achieved weren't, didn't achieve is like a balanced life. What I achieved was, some mediocre results in some races.
I think
So,
that's it's always been a particularly hard thing as a cyclist because you get into the sport and you see the dedication of athletes in other disciplines, namely road riding, and how
yeah.
much deprivation in their diet and a lot of other commitments they have to make, quote unquote, have to make in order to be professional. And I think a lot of them have been dispelled. In fact, I think a lot of the modern science around youth athletics and bringing cyclists, young cyclists into the sport is saying don't do any of that. Like we really have to think about you holistically, keep you happy and motivated. And maybe as you get to that ultimate extreme elite level, there has to be some of more of these draconian approaches to fitness and power to weight ratio, but they have no place in a young athlete's life, in my opinion.
I am with you on that. And yeah, I often question the like our culture, American culture has a very strong focus on professional athletics. And in fact, we elevate these people. They're celebrities, they're very well compensated. Huge numbers of people go to big stadiums to watch people play a game, as opposed to maybe meeting up with some friends and playing a game yourselves, which is one of the things I love about the bicycle, by the way, is that it is the sort of activity that it's very participatory as opposed to, say, American football, where it seems to be more about tribal identity than anything else.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So interesting. I mean, if for the listener, if you haven't already listened to that podcast, it should be one episode back in your podcast feed. So definitely give it a listen. If you have any feedback, Ted is actually in the Ridership forum. Obviously, Randall and I are there. So we'd love to hear from you about new areas that you'd like, maybe Randall in particular, to explore, in addition to
Yeah.
feedback from me.
Yeah. And any guests that you think would be appropriate for this sort of exploration as well, that sort of input would be much appreciated.
Yeah, for sure. So on my side, and I set the alarm at 5 a.m. this morning for my dawn patrol ride. And the
Yeah.
way that the way the dawn is creeping earlier and earlier this time of year, a few disruptions in my sleep, I just could not raise to the call this morning, and I'm a bit saddened by that.
You've done quite a few of those this year, yeah?
Yeah, it's been pretty regular since I've been back in Marin. And I have to say, for anybody listening, if you haven't ever done a dawn patrol ride, as daunting as it might seem to get up before the sun rises, I highly recommend it. There's something about being out there in the woods and the trails that is super peaceful at night. And for us here in Mill Valley and around Mount Tam, it's quite magical because I'm on I guess it'd be sort of the western slope of Mount Tam. So I cannot see the sunrise until I get to the very top and around the corner, this very unique corner of the top of East Peak. And the sun, if I time it right, the sun is magically rising over the East Bay. And it's just super special.
Such a beautiful spot, and that experience of getting up in the morning and being very single-minded about getting out the door on your bike, and there's no time to, for email or other distractions to break up that headspace from when you were asleep to when you're out having some experience. It's really wonderful.
I'm very much, because of the time of day and the time of morning, I've got to lay everything out: my socks, my bibs, my knee warmers, my vest, my arm warmers. I got to make sure my bag is on the bike and anything else I need this time of year. And I know my East Coast and Canadian friends are going to chastise me for this. It is in the 40s, which I think is reasonably cold. But I've been thinking a lot about gear lately.
Hmm. So I, as you know, grew up in Boston and started training seriously out that way when I was in grad school. And 40-degree days were the days where you would just like push everything off your schedule and do your century ride. It's like 40 degrees. You kidding me? This is amazing. Even 20-degree days were days where if it was sunny enough, you would put on your lobster claw gloves and your heavy ski balaclava and multiple layers and jacket, and you would, maybe do a shorter ride and stop at a couple Dunkin' Donuts along the way to as I used to do, stick my hands under the hand dryer in the bathroom to warm up every, hour and a half so I didn't lose a finger.
I've been very careful not to complain because I realize that the hate mentions can come in very quickly for living in California. But I also
Mm,
recognize that, it's just important to have the right gear and the right approach.
yeah.
And so the reason I'm not complaining is that I've geared up appropriately. And a couple of things I wanted to highlight because I think as newer athletes, I'm often surprised at some of the lack of equipment I see people having. Some stuff that as a Bay Area cyclist, I think are fundamentally required in the wardrobe.
Yeah.
And, specifically, I would call out a vest and arm warmers because they're
Hmm.
so versatile. I think one of the things I've noted about being in this area versus other places I've lived is there's quite a lot of inconsistency in the weather you're going to experience, whether you're in San Francisco, close to the bay, further north. You definitely can expect to enter different weather patterns on each ride.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I would add to that a cap and a base layer, which I actually don't waste money on. Well, I don't spend money on base layers. I just use old jerseys as base layers. That works really well.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I mean, layering is key. And I think as
Mm.
you get around the sport, you end up acquiring jerseys. So yeah, I'm with you. Like, I do have a couple proper base layers, which I do like because they're designed quite well for wicking. But wearing two jerseys does the trick as well.
Yeah. And then a leg warmer of some sort. Same deal. You can start with them, and then as the day warms up, take them off. I went with knickers, not knickers. I went with just knee warmers with my latest acquisition, and I actually don't like them nearly as much. I find them neither here nor there because with leg warmers, you could always roll them up partially if you wanted to expose a little bit of shin. So,
Yeah, I think if you've got a knicker, which is basically a short that goes down to your calf, so it's a connected piece of fabric, you're committed. So if you get it right, it's great because anytime anything's just completely sewn together, it can feel really nice. But I've always found it's hard to totally get it right. So I'm with you. Knee warmers and arm warmers just feel like they give me a lot of versatility in regulating my temperature throughout the day.
I've also ended up with a strange tan line on my upper calf as a consequence of those forgetting to reapply sunscreen.
As a cyclist, you have to pick your poison, right? Where's that awkward tan line going to happen? Because it's going to happen somewhere.
You are starting in the dark, right, for these rides?
Yeah, yeah, I am. So I've got a bar mounted lighting system, and one of the things I do like about the pre dawn ride is that I know I'm riding into the sunrise. And the sunrise
Hmm.
does two things. It adds light, obviously, and warmth.
Mm,
So it allows me to make a little bit maybe more aggressive decisions about the amount of lighting I have, or whether I have a head mounted light or a bar mount.
hmm.
It doesn't really matter for that particular ride. I'm basically climbing for an hour and 20 minutes to get to the top. So I don't really have to worry about any high speed moments in that ride. So really a modicum of
Mm.
lighting works fine in that scenario.
It's rather ideal in all regards because you're accumulating heat. You're not traveling at high speeds, so you don't have a lot of wind to sap that heat away, and you're not going so fast that you would need very much lighting at all in order to light the path. I know when I do my late night rides, which I used to do when I lived in the city, it's big headlamp, big handlebar mounts, big battery on the down tube, and you need all of those lumens in order to carry the speed that I like to carry.
Yeah, that's the thing on the gravel bike. It's pretty easy to exceed the lumens. If you've got a 300 lumen light or something like that, you can very easily outride that, you
Mm.
know, very, very quickly. And that's going to cause problems, particularly if you're off road.
Yeah, I really want something 1200 watts or so on the handlebar, and on the headlamp, I usually will go smaller. 300 to 500 is adequate. A little bit more is nice to have, but even that supplemental 3 to 500 is better than nothing.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I'm going to be looking for in the near future. I think I have a couple old headlamps, but I do want to get one as I think this spring I'll be doing a little bit more night riding.
Very cool. Very cool. Any big plans coming up before we sign off for this episode?
I've just late breaking news got there's a local bike shop that's doing a kind of virtual challenge up Mount Tam, but kind of a little bit different route than I would normally take. So it's going up a trail called Deer Park out of Muir
Hmm,
Woods and then over to Pantole and all the way up to East Peak. And it's
excellent.
kind of two sections. They're doing a sort of time trial via Strava kind of format. I do not expect I do not expect to be at the front end of those timing chip segments by any means, but I developed a really rad route to extend it over Laurel Dell and go over to Alpine Dam, back down to Phoenix Lake and up. So I'm actually excited about the route that I designed.
Great. That's great.
Yeah, how about you?
I'll be doing my usual Saturday ride with my friend Isaac tomorrow. And then next week I head out on a road trip. So I'll be out of the Bay for 3.5 or so weeks, going to Death Valley, meeting my colleague Sam, thesis colleague Sam, in the desert there. Then a couple of weeks in southern Utah, renting a house, and then the Arizona desert outside of Sedona, and then back through Joshua Tree in my converted Prius, which I will have just it sleeps to the bed. The bike goes on top of the bed, but I just got a my brother-in-law bought me a fire pit, a portable fire pit that's underneath the bed. So I'll have a portable fire pit, a pop-up shower stall. I might even bring my telescope all in the back of this Prius, and it actually works out really well. It's quite a good setup. In 50 mpg, you can't really complain about.
This is going to be awesome. I can't wait to
Yeah.
see some of the pictures of your riding, but also some of the pictures of your setup, which you've
Yeah,
promised to share.
I've been promising to share for some time, so that will happen now that I have all the different components and I will be someplace beautiful to do the setup justice.
I think the perfectionist in you has sort of resisted sharing any images about your Prius setup.
Yeah, those tendencies are strong. I mean, it kept me from doing that episode for how many months now?
Many, many
Working
months.
on it, my friend. I'm working on it.
I will say, I did want to mention, that route that I drew up this morning, I've hosted in the Ridership Ride with GPS club account. And
Hmm.
it's something we haven't talked about much, but we do have a club on Ride with GPS, as you know. And
Hmm.
I've been building more and more routes via the community and posting them up there. So for the listener, make sure to jump into the Ridership forum to get a link to our Ridership Ride with GPS club.
Yes, and everybody who is a ridership member, which ridership membership is free, gets a free Ride with GPS account, correct?
Yeah, and it's an upgraded Ride with GPS account. So I think there's additional features that you can get within the phone app once you're a
Hmm.
member. So that's really cool. I mean, it's a really cool benefit of joining the ridership.
Yeah. So, all right, my friend. Well, always a pleasure chatting with you.
We'll talk again soon. So that's it for this week's edition of the Gravel Ride podcasts in the dirt. Thanks for joining us and spending a little bit of time with us this week. If you're looking to connect with us between episodes, feel free to join us in the Ridership Forum. Simply visit www.theridership.com for your invite. If you're not already a podcast subscriber, please hit the subscribe button now. It's super important to our feedback loop to know that you're out there listening. We'll be back in your feed next week with another long form interview. And until next time, here's to finding some dirt under your wheels.